Well, friends, today we have come to the video that you may have all been waiting for if you are actually thinking about writing a book and just don't know where to start. Now, I will go ahead and say that this is going to be one of those days where the quality of the video is just not going to be great, but we're making it work. This window behind me was just very bright. The lighting was off, but we're working with what we got, and you're here for the content anyway, not the video quality, right? So I'm going to start talking to you about some of the different ways that I go about writing a book. Now, this is going to be specifically tailored to nonfiction books right now. I am working on a fiction series, but as I'm finding out, that's an entirely different category of writing. They are so polar opposite in the way that I approach those projects. And so for this specific video series, we're talking about nonfiction books. Maybe I'll do a fiction one in the future after I get a little more writing under my belt. But as of right now, this is nonfiction based. So I think one of the most crucial pieces to actually sitting down and writing is figuring out your writing style and finding your voice, so to speak. So for me personally, I prefer to write as I speak. Sometimes that means that I'm going to have, fragmented sentences in my book. Sometimes that means that I'm just going to use words that other people maybe wouldn't use, but that are specific to the way that I talk. Because one of the biggest compliments that I get on my books is people say, it's like I can hear you reading this to me. I can hear your voice in my head as I'm reading this because it just sounds like you. It just, the writing style is just so unique to you. And I think that's sometimes what sets you apart from other books and other writers is if you have your own unique style. Same thing with music, right? We all have artists that we love listening to, and it's because their music doesn't quite sound the same as everybody else. There's something a little bit different about them. There's something a little bit unique about the way that they sing or the type of music that they compose and things like that. So if you are able to find your unique writing style or tone of voice, that's going to set you apart in the long run from some of the other books out there. And it'll kind of help separate you from the noise. It will help you find your people faster, in my opinion, because you're not trying to tailor to the masses. You are creating for the people who need the message, and you are specifically tailoring it to them. And like the quote from Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come, but you have to build it for them. Like you have to build it for the specific group of people that you have in mind of who this book is going to help. So when you're writing, just keep that in mind, that this is not something that you're trying to reach everyone everywhere. When you create a specific project for a specific group of people, those people are eventually going to find it. So that's kind of what you want to do when you're using finding your voice. Now, it doesn't have to be the way that you speak in real life. It could be something along the lines of if you want to present yourself as more of an expert, maybe you speak more like a teacher, right? Maybe you're a little more professional because your book is about business. I don't know. Whatever is unique to the message you're sharing. I personally just choose to write as I speak because my tone of voice, I want to be relatable. I want to be easy to understand. I want to be communicated effectively. And people tell me that I do that in my speaking voice. And so I use that to translate into the way that I write as well. And then it also kind of creates a sense of people feeling like they know you as an author when they can hear it in your tone of voice. But personal preference, doesn't have to be done that way. That's just how I prefer to do it. So I wrote some notes down on my handy dandy sticky notes so I wouldn't forget what I wanted to say. So if you see me glancing over here, that's why. The second point after you've found your voice is to be consistent throughout the entirety of your writing. You don't want to start off being relatable and friendly, and then switch into professional mode. You want to make it consistent throughout because you want people to focus on the message and not be confused by bouncing around from tone to tone. So consistency is a big thing. Not only in the tone of voice that you use, but in the content that you use. And we'll talk about the content of the book later. But just being consistent helps to not distract from the message, because ultimately the whole reason you're writing the book is for the message. It's for the message that you want people to get out of it, right? So if you are wanting to communicate the message effectively, consistency plays a big part in that. Think of it kind of like a song. I know I talked about musicians earlier, but when a musician is writing a song, when they're composing and creating and producing music, there's a certain flow to it, right? Like there's a beat that's pretty consistent throughout the song. There's a flow and a rhythm for how things go. You kind of want to set up your book the same way. You want to be consistently on flow, on beat with the way that you communicate and with the tone of voice that you use. So that's basically the gist of finding your writing style and keeping it consistent throughout. So the second piece of this is writing content. When you actually sit down to write the book, a lot of people can get confused about, well, where do I even start? What do I even do? And there's a lot of different ways that you can go about this. This is my personal way that I like to write books. Okay, so if it doesn't work for you, take it with a grain of salt. But there are 4 key pieces that I like to include in all of my writing. And that's information, revelation, analogies, and personal stories. So if you are communicating something to someone, if you are teaching them something that they do not already know, or if you are telling them something that they do not already understand, it is important to have information, right? Because you don't want to assume that they know what you're talking about. You may think it's general information, like this is common sense, this is something that everybody knows, but that's not always the case. So including basic information about the subject you're talking about is important, because that will help any beginner who has no idea what you're talking about, who has no concept of the subject that you're sharing about. Information is crucial for them. So just sharing that basic information. The revelation is how that information applies to them. So how they can use that information and plug it into their daily life. What's the aha moments that you had as you were learning about this subject that you can then impart to them? The big aha moments don't have to be, they don't have to be crazy groundbreaking to you in order to be phenomenal and life-changing to someone else. They can just be something that you were like, oh, never thought about it that way. The perspective shift, something simple that just kind of made your life a little bit easier or made the information easier to apply. And then you take that and you tell them, and they know how to apply it to their life. The other thing is analogies. I love a good analogy. And anyone who knows me knows that I talk in analogies. I really do, because that's the way that my brain works, because that helps me make sense of things. If I can break it down as if I could explain it to a 5-year-old. So if you're an Office fan, you may have seen the episode where Oscar is trying to explain the budget surplus to Michael Scott, and he's like not comprehending. And Michael Scott says, okay, explain it to me like I'm 5. And Oscar says, okay, if your parents gave you $10 to run a lemonade stand and you only used 8 of those dollars to buy the materials you needed, you want to spend the other $2 so that next time your parents will still give you $10. It was an analogy that Oscar used to break down a complicated subject and make it easy to understand. And that's something that I have been complimented on a lot is that people tell me I'm able to take really, really complex subjects and break it down. It's all I'm doing is giving an analogy. That's it. It's nothing like groundbreaking. It's nothing earth shattering that I'm sharing. It's just the way I explain it that helps make it bite sized for anyone. So a beginner can understand it. Someone more experienced can understand it. The analogies really, really, really help with that. And the last thing is personal stories. I love using a good personal story because it accomplishes several different things. Number one, if you are using personal stories throughout your book, that helps establish you as kind of an expert. It helps people know that you actually understand what you're talking about because you've actually been through it. And you're not somebody who's just, regurgitating information that they learned on the internet. A personal story is going to establish you as an expert in that field. The other thing that a personal story will do is make you relatable. It will help people to connect with you because they feel like they're getting to know you as a person. They feel like they're getting to know the author behind the book and not just reading a book full of information. That can kind of feel very much like a textbook. I remember reading a book one time and someone I know had written this book. And so I read it, I bought it and I read it to support them. And my husband asked me how it was. And I said, they've got good information, but there's no personal stories. So it reads like a textbook. And that may have been what the person was going for. If that's what you're going for, great. But to me, personal stories are what separate something reading like a textbook and something reading like a book I can actually engage with the author in. So if you include personal stories, it's going to help your reader connect to you more on a personal level, which is going to make them more likely to want to purchase other things that you have written because it establishes you as a person and not a brand, if that makes any sense. Okay, so now that we've talked about kind of the four main pieces to include in your writing, how do you bring it all together? So when I'm actually sitting down to write, I'm going to actually get my book out so I can use this as an example. If you haven't seen this, this is the book that I just released called Leaving Defeat, Illuminating the Path to Victory. What you want to do when you are sitting down to write, the first thing that you want to include is some sort of hook. You want to get something that's going to get the reader's attention right away. It doesn't have to be crazy. I typically like to start with a story, or I like to start with a catchy sentence that's just going to make the reader, like maybe it catches them off guard a little bit. So I'll give you an example. In the introduction, this is the first opening sentence. I sat in our church's Wednesday night Bible study one night, listening to the preacher teach on the book of Revelation. One thing he said in particular really stuck out to me. Okay, 2 sentences in, I've started with a story, but it's going to hook the reader because they want to hear how the story ends. So they're more likely to keep reading so they can get to the end of the story so they can figure out what happens next. Let me find this other chapter. Chapter 1, I started with a story too. When I was in elementary school, I used to love checking under the picnic tables on the playground. Started with a story, hooks the reader, makes them want to know what happens next. I was trying to find this one chapter. Yeah, okay. So in chapter 3, it's called Know Your Season. And this one, I did not start with a story. This is how I started it. I'm just going to say it. Fairy tales have done us dirty. We've all grown up listening to the stories that all sound the same. So that is a sentence it's not a story, but it still hooks the reader because they're like, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Fairy tales have done us dirty. How? I want to know what you mean by that. And so they're more likely to keep reading because they're hooked. There's something that grabs their attention. So you want to get something that's going to make them want to read more. And that's where in the middle, you can plug in the information, the revelation, the analogies, and the personal stories. And those do not have to go in that order. In fact, I would suggest that you mix it up. I like to just, again, make it flow like a song. My brain tends to think in patterns and rhythms. And so not so much patterns of like A, B, C, D, but patterns of just flow, like in music, like in a song. So I will look at my chapter and I'll start writing, and I may have just given a chapter of just a chunk of information. And then I'll be like, okay, but I need to, maybe that was complex information, so I need to break it down. So now I'm going to use an analogy. And then I use that analogy and I'm like, okay, well, now I need them to understand how this applies to their life. So I'm going to include the revelation. And then maybe on the next section, I include a personal story. Just break it up. Don't make it so rigid that you feel like you have to go point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4. Just kind of look at what the story that you're telling needs. Look at what the message needs as you're telling it. Look at it from a reader's perspective, where if I'm reading this, does this make sense to me? If not, what do I need? What do I need to add in to spice it up a little bit, if that makes sense? And then at the end of a chapter or the end of a book, you also want to end on a good note. I keep comparing this to like songwriting, but if you have a song that just abruptly ends, you're just kind of like, what? You're thrown off. It doesn't matter how good the song was. If it just, then it kind of is jarring to our senses. And so if you have a song that ends on just a satisfying note, it makes the whole song 10 times better. I mean, you all know what I'm talking about. You listen to music, I'm sure. So I typically like to end my chapters with a sentence that's going to make the reader feel something. They'll either feel encouraged, they'll feel uplifted, they'll feel challenged or empowered, maybe something that is going to make the reader feel like, okay, I'm satisfied with what I just read. And because I'm satisfied and because I have this hit of dopamine, I want to keep reading more because I liked that. My brain enjoyed that. So my brain wants the reward system of, if I read more, I get more dopamine. So it just kind of follows the psychological pattern of helping people retain the information. So for example, let me get back to, I'm given another example in the introduction. So this is I'm just going to read the last paragraph of this introduction so that you can see what I mean. So this is the last paragraph. It says, make no mistake, if you choose to follow Jesus down this path, this is a Christian book, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. If you choose to follow Jesus down this path, it's going to cost you everything, but what you will get back is everything and then some. So if you're tired of being pushed around by the situations in your life, by the loneliness that cripples you, or the fears in your mind that replay on a loop, and if you're tired of feeling like hell is doing its best to kill you, just remember, there's always victory behind the defeat. All you have to do is set out to find it. So you see how that was resonating with the reader. It's validating their emotions. It's validating their experiences, but it's also challenging them and telling them it doesn't have to stay this way. And it's also encouraging them that they already have a victory. They just have to find it. So it's making them feel all of those things at once. That's going to give their brain a hit of dopamine that tells them to keep reading. And I'll even go over here to the end of the book itself and show you how I ended that. So again, this is the whole entire last paragraph of the end of the book. Living out your victory simply means that you're free to help others discover theirs. You are no longer bound, no longer trapped, no longer stuck. You've left defeat in the rearview mirror. Welcome to the land of victory. This isn't your finish line. This is your starting point. And I, for one, can't wait to see what you do next. So you see how, number one, I want to point this out. This is my author style. This is my author voice. I had some fragmented sentences in here where I said, no longer trapped, no longer stuck. That's a fragmented sentence, but that's how I talk. And so it makes sense. This is connecting with the reader. It's welcoming them into a place, making them feel like they've accomplished something by the end of this book. And I don't mean this in a manipulative way, like I'm trying to do some psychological jujitsu and make them feel something that's a facade. I genuinely want them to get something out of this book. So I'm writing to them as if they got something out of this book. You see what I'm saying? So I'm congratulating them on reaching this point in their journey. That's validating everything they just went through. It's validating all of the work that they've put in. And it's also connecting them to me as an author, because the last sentence says, and I, for one, can't wait to see what you do next. So that's connecting them to me as an author. It's connecting them to, oh, this person is actually in my corner. This person actually wants to see me win. So I'm going to do my best to actually carry this out and put this message into practice, because this person is actually rooting for me. So those are just some pointers on the content of your book and how to write. But I also want to give you a few writing tips that are a little bit practical for when you actually sit down to do the writing. So my first piece of advice was given to me by an author friend of mine when I started my book. I was very much in my head about it. I was very much like, I have to get it right. I have to, this has to be good. And I was putting so much pressure on that first draft, because I was like, if it's not good, then it's not worth writing. Right. And my friend told me, she said, Caitlin, you have to let it suck. You have to let your first draft suck, because books are made in the editing process. So the first draft is just getting something on paper. If you have been in the writing community for any amount of time, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, you can edit a bad page, but you can't edit a blank page. And that is very, very true. If I am looking at a first draft and I'm reading back through it, I can be like, ugh, this sucks. But because I'm an avid reader, and because I'm kind of like, I'm very critical about the books that I read, because I know what I like. So I can look at a book and be like, well, I liked this book, but I wish it had more of this. I liked this book, but I wish they had explained this more. So if I'm reading through my own first draft, because I'm such a book critic in my mind, I can read through that and I can critique it. I can be like, this needs this here. This needs this here. So get over the fact that your first draft is going to suck. It's just going to. But the editing is where it comes to life. So hold off on all judgments about your first draft. There are so many times where I would write out pages and pages and pages and want to scrap the whole thing. But I had to be disciplined enough to keep going and say, no, I'm not going to throw this away. I have already put this work into it. I'm just going to edit it until it's better. So don't try to edit it during the writing process. Don't try to use the exact words you want to use in the writing process. Just get it out. Just get it out there at first. So that's big, big, big writing tip. If you can get that down, if you can allow yourself to just let it suck the first draft, then you will be surprised how quickly the editing process will come along and how good it is after the fact. The other tip is, when you're sitting down to write, turn off your phone. Put it on Do Not Disturb and put it inside of a drawer. Don't even look at it. Facebook can wait. And if you're anything like me, I tend to be like, but what if somebody needs me? What if my kid's school calls and, my kid fell off the monkey bars? Or what if somebody has a heart attack and they can't get in touch with me? I think about all of the what ifs. But it's like, I saw a quote the other day that said, our phones were never meant to be electronic leashes, but that's how we treat them. We treat them as if they are leashes that we're bound to, that we cannot be separated from. But you think back to before the 90s, I was a 90s baby. So I grew up in that transition period where I didn't grow up in my childhood having a lot of technology. But then by the time I was a teen, we had technology. And so I was kind of right in the middle. But I can remember my childhood and not having access to being able to call someone whenever, not having access to being able to reach someone whenever I wanted. And we were okay. Nothing catastrophic happened that nobody could ever get in touch with us. If it is that big of an emergency, somebody can show up at your house. They absolutely can. And so, 1 hour, is not going to send you into an existential crisis. Now, if you are in a position where you legitimately cannot be away from your phone because maybe you're taking care of someone, maybe your job requires you to be on call, maybe, there's all different sorts of reasons. But if that's the case, I would encourage you to ask for help and just find someone in your life that you can say, hey, I would really like to write for an hour. Can you take care of the baby? Can you sit with my mom? Can you, handle these emails? Whatever the case may be, but just asking for help so you can carve out that writing time. Another thing that I suggest that has been really helpful for me is I tend to be a little scatterbrained, and I'm also a mom and a wife. And so whenever I sit down to write, that's when everything comes to my brain about, oh, this is what I need to do. This is the other things that I could be doing. And I'll say, oh, I forgot to put that laundry in the dryer. Well, we're tempted to get up, go put the laundry in the dryer, come back and then write, but that disrupts the whole process. So what I have learned to do is I'll have a notebook or my handy dandy sticky notes beside me. And if something comes to my brain, I'll just jot it down. Instead of disrupting myself from the whole writing process, instead of getting up from my chair, I'll just write down, put laundry in the dryer, or finish your kid's project, make that dentist appointment. Whatever's in your brain that's distracting you from writing, write it down so that you don't forget it, but you can deal with it later. It's all about prioritizing your time and time management. That's really crucial for actually finishing a book. So the last piece of advice that I have for you is one that my sister turned me on to, and it was a game changer, because sometimes I do get so bombarded by my thoughts, and it's difficult to organize them, and it's difficult to make my brain silent enough to be focused. And so my sister sent me this video one time, and it was of another author saying that they used the Mulan instrumental soundtrack to write their books and just play it softly in the background as they're writing. And y'all, I don't know what they put in that soundtrack, but the focus that came when I was writing, I had that soundtrack on and I'm just, because I was locked in. Now, my book is called Leaving Defeat, and that soundtrack is very like battle cry. It's set in the middle of a war, right? It's like there's all this action going on, and so it fit the tone of my book. And so when I was writing, I was like, yes, this is helping me just creatively focus and come up with ideas. But if you're writing, about marriage and the tone of your book is a little more romantic and sweet, maybe you play a different instrumental track. Maybe you play the Beauty and the Beast soundtrack. I personally love the Disney soundtracks because can't nobody do a soundtrack like Disney. Like they know what they're doing, right? But maybe you have a different soundtrack that you really love that fits the tone of your book that you can put on them in the background, and it will distract your brain just enough where you can stay focused and stay on task and you're not thinking about a billion different things. So I know that was a lot of information, but that's basically the gist of the writing process. I hope that was super helpful for y'all. I hope this series really helps you, gives you the motivation to keep writing, because someone out there needs to hear your story and someone out there can benefit from what you have to share and the knowledge and wisdom that you have to share with the world. So I really hope that it encourages you to actually sit down this week and get some writing done. If you are not to the writing point in your process yet, I do have a video that I posted last week about creating an outline and how to organize your thoughts. So you might want to check that out before you sit down and do the writing if you haven't already. But yeah, next week we'll probably be talking about editing and some of the things that come with that, and just the process of making the book come together in general. So be sure to check back for that. But as for now, I hope this was very helpful, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Thanks for watching.